Hello, everyone. Welcome to Markers Up with Jack Johnston. Thanks so much for tuning in. I am Jack Johnston. Let's just get stuck right into it. So, as you can see, this episode's title is Cellar Dwellers to Ladder Leaders. I wanted to talk about the bottom four teams of last year. And if you need to be reminded, those teams are North Melbourne, West Coast Eagles, GWS, and Essendon. And I wanted to talk about them not in a negative light. Didn't want to talk about the weaknesses they've got here, the struggles they'll have there, how they're going to be off the mark, how they're going to struggle again. I don't want to add to that negativity. So instead, in this episode, I'm going to be each team's respective lawyer and put forward their best case to go from bottom four to top four. And this also, just to be clear, isn't some completely ridiculous idea, because we know that normally one, if not two teams goes from bottom eight or bottom nine to top eight. We know that there is changeover between finals teams. We know this. But it's also pretty common for teams to go from top four to bottom four and vice versa. We saw it with Collingwood this past season. They went from 17th all the way up to 4th. We've seen it happen before with teams like Brisbane, teams like Sydney. Like, it does happen. And so while there is a little bit of, I wouldn't bet money on any of these results happening that I'm about to talk about, I do actually feel kind of confident. Actually, I feel very confident that one of these teams will go to the top eight, potentially even top four. Because all four of these teams, I feel like, have a real angle they can lean into, and a list that has some strengths. Might be a coaching advantage teams have. There's no way more than one goes to, makes the finals out of these teams. But I think one of them does. Don't know which one. I have one I'm leaning towards. But let's just get stuck into it. So first up, there's North Melbourne. Wooden Spooners from last year. 2 wins, 20 losses. Had a pretty horrendous season. But, they've got in Alistair Clarkson now, who's going to try and revitalise this team. Where are they at? So in analysing their list, let's just kind of look at their strengths first, specifically when it comes to their roster, the players they have. What are their strengths? And I think you'll also find that there's quite a few themes with all four of these teams and the kind of strengths that they have. But to start off with the Kangaroos, they've got a really balanced midfield. So that you've got your contested pressure players in Ben Cunnington and Hugh Greenwood, right? Ben Cunnington is one of the best contested ball beasts in the league. He is. He's scary. He's tough. He doesn't give up. He's just one of those players that you want at the coalface when the going gets tough, gets in there and gets the contested ball and gives it to your team. Hugh Greenwood isn't so much the same player, but he's a big pressure player. Like, he's always up there in terms of total tackles. He's a tackling machine. He's also really tough. Takes a lot of contact, gives a lot of contact. So you've got those two players there. But they've also got clean distributors of the football, right? Guys who will get the ball from a Cunnington or a Greenwood and do something with it, really effective. And those guys are, Jai Simpkin and Luke Davies-Uniacke, as well as Bailey Scott on the wing. I think he's actually quite underrated. And you get a lot of underrated players when you're on a bad team because you don't really get much attention. But I really rate Bailey Scott. But obviously Jai Simpkin and Davies-Uniacke those players are the ones who are more well-known. But I think Bailey Scott kind of deserves to be in that same kind of list of players who can get the ball in space and do something with it. So I feel like that's one real strength they've got, is not only do I rate their midfield, it's balanced. A lot of teams that have good midfields but aren't great teams, it's because they're all sort of, they've put all their eggs in one basket. they're a real contested midfield, or they're a real fast midfield, or whatever it is. North actually have quite a balance there, which I think will really serve them well. I think they've also got a really strong defensive spine. Ben Mackay is, or was it Mackay? We'll never know. We'll never know if it's Mackay or Mackay. I'm going to go with Mackay because his brother's Harry Mackay, so that would make sense. But Ben Mackay, talk about underrated. You look at his stats and the kind of influences he has over games. It's really impressive. He's not in that like top 5 or even top 10 of like key position defensive posts, but he's right there, and you feel like with Alistair Clarkson in charge, he might get into that top 10. But even so, really rate him. And then the new recruit, Griffin Logue, they might play him forward, but when I look at their backline and what there is, they might go with Griffin Logue as that second tall defender. Not that he's that tall. I think he's like 194, but I don't know. It'll really depend on what their preseason looks like and sort of who's fighting for that spot. But wouldn't surprise me if Griffin Logue, given he's had a lot of forward experience, but he's also had a lot of backline experience as of late, and they might pop him in there. And if that's the case, that's a good spine. I like that. I like Mackay and Logue as your two tall defenders, and I feel like they could go up against the best of forwards. And then when you go to their forward line, it doesn't jump off the page as amazing, but could be one of those forward lines that just jumps out of nowhere, and you're like, whoa, they've finally just gotten it all together at the same time. So you got Nick Larkey, right, who's basically their main full forward, centre-half forward guy. But there's also Charlie Comben, who hasn't seen very much football because he only got drafted, I think, a couple of years ago, but also he's had injury issues. I think he's going to be healthy coming into this season. And he's something like 199 centimeters. Like, he's a tall bloke. And if you could have those two playing as your full forwards, your centre-half forwards, that would be, if you're Jai Simpkin, running out of the centre square, you'd love to be looking at guys like Larkey and Comben to kick the ball to. And so if those two are playing, then the guys like Jaden Stevenson and Cam Zurhaar, they'll be able to do what they're best at. And that's crumbing the ball, snapping goals, providing pressure. That's what they're best at. Cam Zurhaar in particular, he fits the Dustin Martin, Jake Stringer archetype to me. I don't think he's there yet, but he's not super tall, right? He's sort of that medium-sized forward, but has a great burst, has a great goal sense, and is just strong. I feel like you could see Cam Zurhaar being that guy, being the guy who plays 90% forward, but goes into some stoppages, and has a real impact. And then should be mentioned, we don't know how much of these guys are going to be playing football this year because they're rookies, but George Wardlaw and Harry Sheasel, they're raw, but man, they possess some frenetic, youthful talent. If they can work their way into the team, that could be another element that they might have an edge. When you got 2 top 5 picks in the league, sometimes it takes time to for those guys to get ready for AFL football. But you look at Dacos last year, sometimes they just slip right in. And if those guys can do it, man, they would be really fun to watch and really impact the midfield and the forward line, depending on where they play. So that's kind of their list and what I really like about their list. When it comes to coaching, it's pretty obvious. It's got Alistair Clarkson, one of the best coaches of all time. I feel like just culturally, he'll set a new standard for that club, who sort of have a culture that's used to losing, at least over the last, 10, 20 years. And I think also he probably picked North Melbourne because he knew of the list I just talked about, that they don't bat very deep, but the guys they've got could really have an impact. And I think you'll find the best ways to use all these guys. So with all of that said, when you combine the list and the coach, what do we see, right? What do we see for a North Melbourne team that makes it to the top 4, right? Goes from wooden spoon to top 4. What would we have to see? So I think this is the situation. There'll be a contested, clearance-based midfield with Cunnington and Greenwood at the coalface and Simpkin and Davies-Uniacke getting the ball from Cunnington and Greenwood, and then perhaps having Zurhaar come into a stoppage and then sending the ball inside 50. then they'll rely on that forward pressure from you guys like Zerha, but also Larky's pretty athletic, and I think they've got guys that are athletic. So they'll use their forward pressure and their athleticism in the forward line to keep that ball inside 50. I feel like that's going to be, just looking at the guys they've got, I feel like that's what Clarkson is going to he's going to see in this group and go, that's what we're going to be. We're going to be a contested team. We're going to be a clearance team, kind of Melbourne-esque of 2021. And then ideally you want your key forwards to mark the ball. But even if they don't, rely on our forward pressure and our versatility with guys like Jaden Stevenson and Zerha and your key forwards like Larky. Use that to keep it inside 50, right? And then if that doesn't work, I feel like Mackay and Logue will be able to lock down top tier forwards. That might be maybe Logue is a little bit of a stretch. Definitely Mackay though. And so if those guys can lock down at least to some degree, your Jeremy Camerons, your Aaron Nortons, your Charlie Curnows, then you can let the interceptors play zone across the defensive half, which I feel like the rest of their defense sort of fits that mold. So I feel like that's what North Melbourne are going to look like. And it's what they're going to have to look like if they want to go from cellar dweller to ladder leader. And just lastly, what does their fixture look like? So they have the easiest fixture, which makes sense given they were the worst team last year. They opened the season at home against last year's 17th place West Coast. And they only play one top eight team twice all season. So they could start 2-2, start the month 2-2, possibly 3-1 if they can get an upset against Fremantle on the road or Carlton at home. And I feel like starting strong early is really important for these teams. So overall, I look at North Melbourne and I think they don't have a deep list, but I really rate the players, their best players. And their best players are spread across the field. They feel they have a lot of eggs in different baskets, which might be able to cover the lack of depth that they have. And with Alistair Clarkson in charge, this team could go anywhere. To go from 2 wins to top 4, that would be a tough task. But like I've said, teams have done it before. Maybe not from the wooden spoon, but I've gone from bottom 4 to top 4. Collingwood did it last season. That, to me, would be the blueprint for North Melbourne if they were to go down that path. Now let's go to West Coast. 17th last season. Also 2 wins and 20 losses. Looking at their list, a surprising spread of experience across the field. You know, you've got Hearn, McGovern, and Barras as your backman. You've got Tim Kelly, Luke Shuey, Dom Sheed, Andrew Gaff. Those guys in that midfield. Elliot Yeo, like kind of that halfback midfielder. Their forward line is going to really miss Josh Kennedy, but still got Jack Darling, who's a really experienced forward. Got Liam Ryan, who's an experienced forward. Just across the field, you look at their team and you're like, man, how does this team only gets 2 wins? And of course, if you remember the last season, they just got ravaged by injury and COVID. They're a 2-win team because of health, not because of a lack of talent. And just to go back to that midfield, this is what their midfield is on paper. I feel like, and correct me if you feel like I'm off on this, but I feel like on paper, this team would rival most midfields in the league. So you've got Nick Naitanui as your ruckman. You got Tim Kelly and Luke Shuey as your followers. And then you've got Dom Sheed, Andrew Gaff, and Jaden Hunt as your center line. Like, just to repeat, Nick Nat, Tim Kelly, Luke Shuey, Dom Sheed, Andrew Gaff, Jaden Hunt, who's just come over from Melbourne as a winger. Man, that is a really good midfield. Now, the issue is some of those guys are getting a bit older and might not be fit enough to be the players they used to be. But we've seen older players turn it around all the time. You know, players are getting to 33, 35 and still playing at an elite level. Like, I feel like David Mundy could have played an extra year, you know? Like, and they're not that old. So if they can just get fit, man, that midfield would be tough for anyone. And then I mentioned the forwards. So you've got Jack Darling. If he's healthy, which, you know, he's a bit touch and go for round 1 after the ankle injury I think, in a match sim. So he's touch and go, but it looks like he'll probably play. And if Oscar Allen can also kind of stay healthy and get some opportunities because he hasn't played much football, that could be a real dangerous key forward duo that will attract the attention from defenders, which allows Liam Ryan, who's probably their most dangerous forward, which is really says something because of Jack Darling, allows him to sort of be his dangerous self and go around and, kick those crazy goals, take those crazy marks. As a trio of your two talls and your small, Darling, Allen, Ryan, I rate that. I really do. Again, if they're healthy and they're fit, those three could really put some points on the board. So then we look at coaching. You've got Adam Simpson. He's an incredibly experienced premiership winning coach. I feel like if he's got a healthy list that isn't ravaged by COVID this time around, he's got a lot of pieces to play with. And I think this isn't so much a coaching thing as much as it is a team thing. But worth mentioning, they've got a great home field advantage. Advantage. Teams do not like to go over to West Coast and play them. Even when they're bad, they're a tough team to play over there. And obviously that goes the other way because that means they have to travel all the way to Melbourne when they play Melbourne teams. But I think when they're good, they don't really seem to mind as much. At times they've been flat track bullies in a sense, but I still think that really helps having that kind of home field advantage. So taking all that into consideration, their sort of tactical advantage over teams, what will they have to do to get to top four? To me, it's pretty simple. Just because of their experience and proven talent in each positional group, I feel like they can do it. Nick Nat and that star-studded midfield can go toe-to-toe with any midfield in the competition. They have enough firepower up front to put up a winning score. And their backline is well-drilled and tough to outplay. I don't feel like West Coast has to change very much. They just need to stay healthy and implement what they tried to implement last season. I was listening to Adam Simpson's press conference today. Might have come out today or a couple of days ago. And he was talking about how, they didn't really get to see a lot of the tactics they were trying to implement last season because of the health of their list. They had some ideas that they just didn't really see on the park because the guys that they were training with these kind of ideas in mind couldn't play. So I think another year in that system, these players who have already been in the system for a while, but healthy and fit, actually able to implement the kind of tactics and the kind of game plan that Adam Simpson, who's a really good coach, wants to implement. Man, I'm not picking them to go top four. And you can probably tell this is the one that I feel like might. But top 8 would totally put them to go in the top 8. Again, wouldn't bet on it because it's just the league's so tough to predict. But we know that 1 or 2 top 8 teams will drop out. And so there's 2 free spots there every year. Most years, that's the case. Would I pick West Coast to fill one of those 2 spots? Maybe. I feel like they're putting up a really good case. And then you look at their fixture difficulty. So they're ranked 17th. So they've got the second easiest schedule. They open the season against North Melbourne and then play GWS, who we're about to talk about. So they could start the season strong at 2-0. And then they only play 2 top 8 teams twice. So again, starting strong will be really important for them. If they don't, this is what I'll say. If they can't go 2-0 against North Melbourne and GWS, or let's say they don't beat either, then they probably have some major issues and maybe Adam Simpson isn't the guy. But I trust that he is. I really feel like West Coast has it all there. They've got the coaches, they've got the players, and, before health got in the way, they had the game plan. They were a successful club. I think before last year, they hadn't missed finals in a decade. They were one of those teams that were just always in finals, always successful, second, fifth, second, third, always around the pointy end of the season. And they really strike me as the team that, this happens all the time. Just a powerhouse team drops off for a season or two, whether because of health or, a player leaves, whatever it is, and then they're back again. It would kind of shock me if West Coast went another 2-3 win season. It would shock me, because I think it's all there for him. Now we move to GWS. So they were 16th, had 6 wins and 16 losses. Quite the change in this off season. New coach, had a big exodus of players. Like Taranto and Hopper going to Richmond. Like lost a lot of good talent. Got a new coach in. They are an interesting team for reasons we'll get into right now. So looking into their list and the strengths they have there. So they've got a really strong defensive spine with Sam Taylor and Nick Haynes. So they've got that spine that's so important. In this day and age, with how forward lines are built, the kinds of key forwards you have, the key forwards aren't 194, 195 centimeters anymore. They're 198, 199, 200 centimeters, right? So you need at least one defender who can kind of match that. And I don't know Sam Taylor's exact height. I'll quickly look it up because I could be wrong, but I feel like he's a pretty tall spring chicken. So he's 196, so he's not massive. And then Nick Haynes is the other guy. They're both, you look at a guy like Sam Taylor. He's all Australian. Like he's a young gun. And I feel like with Sam Taylor and Nick Haynes, it's a really good spine to go up against Hawkins and Cameron, Curnow and Mackay, Norton and Lobb, like these kinds of duos that we're seeing now, these tall duos. But so they don't just have the spine, they've got the speed off the edge that I really like with Whitfield and a guy like Cumming. I don't know a lot about their list, but man, I know Whitfield used to be an absolute beast. And so if you can kind of get back to that as your halfback, they've got a really balanced defense, that back line. And then with their midfield, it's a nice mix of experience and youth. So they're kind of top tier midfielders. You've got Josh Kelly, Callan Ward, Tom Green, Stephen Cornelio, and Toby Green at those sort of forward half stoppages or maybe centre bounces, things like that. So, and we'll kind of, this is a consistent thread with GWS, but I'll mention it here. On paper, these guys are great. Why they've dropped off, I have no idea. Cornelio was like one of the highest paid midfielders going around once upon a time. Josh Kelly, Callan Ward, like those three in particular, if they can just get back to anywhere near where they used to be a few years ago in the sort of the heyday of GWS when they were making grand finals and or finals in general, man, they could be really good. And then you got a guy like Tom Green. Tom Green is part of this next crop of great young midfielders, like elite. I feel like he's going to take another step here, especially because he'll be given more opportunities now that Taranto and Hopper have gone. And then Toby Green, like I know he's a forward, but man, he has such an impact at the stoppages. And so if you kind of count him as your 10% midfield guy, he could be really good. And then what I really like about their forward line is the versatility. So they got a 3-pronged forward line with Jesse Hogan, Harry Himmelberg, and the rookie number 1 pick, Aaron Cadman, coming in. So you got that 3-pronged tall attack, which I really like. Jesse Hogan, when he played last season, was great. Like, really quite underrated. Love Harry Himmelberg. I know he's kind of flipped back and forth between between the back line and the forward line, but love him as your sort of centre-half forward. And you got Cadman. Cadman, the number 1 pick, could be your third best tall and taking the third best defender from any team. And so you got those 3 guys. And when I mentioned versatility, it's then, okay, we've got those 3 tall. So we're a tall forward line. But we've also got Toby Green. Who's one of the best small to medium forwards in the game. So I like that they've got a bit of mix in terms of how they can approach going inside 50 and the difficulty in how teams have to defend them, because they can't go a completely tall backline because you've got a guy like Toby Green. And if you're going to have a small to medium defender on a guy like Toby Green, well, does that mean you're giving up a bit of height to Aaron Cadman or Harry Himmelberg? Like, I think the versatility and the spread of different kind of forwards that they've got, I think will really help them, particularly when it comes to how defenses are going to have to work around that. Coaching edge, you've got a rookie coach in Adam Kingsley. Doesn't always work, but sometimes, and again, we saw it last year, sometimes that's all you need to just provide a fresh, exciting game plan for a team that's been stagnant. I don't know if Kingsley's going to do that, but we've seen it happen before, and I see no reason why he couldn't do that. And I feel like we'll expect, given his Richmond pedigree, could definitely see some sort of Richmond-like pressure and versatility in this team. And then we go to what's sort of their tactical advantage? What will they have to do? What will they look like if they go from bottom 4 to top 4? So I think their defensive depth allows them to be aggressive and risky with their ball movement. It'll risk a lot of defensive entries, but I back their defense, their spine, and the kind of speed of interceptors they've got. I'd back them, and then you risk a lot of those entries, but you do that in order to put up a high score. And who's kicking those goals? Like I said, it's Cadman, it's Hogan, it's Himmelberg, it's Toby Green. And so I feel like they've got enough guys there to put up the score that might be required if you're giving up a lot of defensive entries. And I think that's what Kingsley's going to recognize and go like, hey, we've got enough depth in our back line. We've got an aggressive, quick, clean midfield. Let's just use that. Go all out. And we've got the guys there inside 50 to do something with those entries. And I feel like that's what Kingsley will. That's what he'll recognize. Now, when you look at their fixture difficulty, not as favorable as you would have liked for a team that was the third worst in the league. So they're ranked 11th, which is, kind of middle of the table in a sense. Not exactly, but pretty close. And then when you look at their sort of opening month, they could start 3-1 because they face Adelaide, West Coast, Carlton, and Essendon. If they can get on a roll, I could see them beating Adelaide, West Coast, and Essendon. Carlton's the one probably that they don't beat, even if they go all the way. But hey, they could. Who knows about Carlton, especially when they'll be missing Sam Walsh at least for the first few weeks. They also only play 2 top 8 teams twice, but 3 if you include Carlton as a top 8 tier club. I know they placed 9th, but I think a lot of people are picking them for top 4 this season, so they kind of belong in that tier. So technically, they kind of play 3 great teams twice. So that's 6 games across the season against really difficult opponents. At least, 6. And then you got, obviously the remaining top 8 sides. So that's kind of GWS in a nutshell to me. Is I feel like they have the players there. I think they have the talent. It's a question of whether or not those midfielders can live up to their own standards, which they haven't really been able to do over the last couple of years. Can Aaron Cadman have a breakout season? Or because he's a rookie key position player, it's going to take time for him to develop? If it can all work out, I really like their spine in general, specifically Taylor and Haynes down back. I like the speed off half back and through the midfield. And I feel like if you got Toby Green in your forward line, he's probably going to kick 2 or 3 goals a game. So I think GWS has a real shot. West Coast so far, they would be my pick. But GWS, man, they could definitely make finals. I'll say that. They could definitely make finals if they're the team that, gets this new coach in and kind of freshens it up. So, lastly, Essendon. So Essendon were 15th last season, had 7 wins, 15 losses. And talk about an off-season of change. Essendon's was messy. Messy. Got rid of Rutten, had a failed attempt to go and get Alistair Clarkson, didn't work out. They're kind of left with egg on their face. But they got Brad Scott in, got some rookies. What can they do? So let's have a look at their list first. What I do really like is their speed off halfback. I think it's really incredible. I think Andrew McGrath and Nick Hine, I really rate those players. And Mason Redmond doesn't necessarily provide speed, but he provides aggressiveness. As you sort of, not so much an intercept defender, that's more sort of Jordan Ridley's MO, but that guy that can just come in and get the ball and get it out of inside 50, get it out of defensive 50. The midfield trio of Merritt, Parrish, and Shield, they're a weird bunch because they get a lot of ball. And when it comes to like the tangibles, they're real quick, they're small and elusive, but they haven't quite gotten to that next step. And I look at a guy like Darcy Parish. Last week's episode was all about impact midfielders versus possession midfielders. Darcy Parish is the top tier possession midfielder. He's a guy who'll get 40 disposals a game, and yet their team will lose by 30 points, and like he'll have no impact in terms of winning. And that does sound tough on Parish, and I don't mean it to be a negative thing, because like I've said, getting those numbers is great because you're giving your team an opportunity to do something with the ball and restricting your team from doing something because they don't have the ball, right? But the fact that Merritt, Parish, and Shield are all the same archetype of speedy, small possession getters who get 35 plus disposals a game, they don't have like an impact guy. And the fact that String is basically going to play no midfield minutes this season, he's going to be just a full-time forward. I worry about that, but we're not talking about negatives. It's tough when talking about Essendon, but talking about the positives. What they do have, though, is those three guys who are really good, speedy, small ball users. And then their ruck situation with Draper, like, he's one of the best young and upcoming ruckmen going around. So that midfield, I feel like, is filled with talent. And then their forward line, man, it is incredibly tall and incredibly dangerous in a good sense for Essendon. You've got Peter Wright, 2 meter Peter, Harrison Jones, and Sam Wiedemann as your three talls. Sam Wiedemann coming over from Melbourne. Melbourne didn't really want him, which is not a great indication, but sometimes that's all you need is a new club, new team, new game plan, and I feel like he could do something with that. So you've got those three talls in Wright, Jones, and Wiedemann, plus Jake Stringer, who will be playing in a permanent sort of out-of-the-square forward line spot, which, to be honest, is probably where he belongs in a sense. Like, at times, he's been a really good stoppage player, but as of late, I don't know if he has the engine for it. He can put up a couple good highlights a game, but is he consistently getting into the engine room and impacting the game? I don't think he does. I just don't think he has the engine for it. So he's probably better off staying inside 50, being a fourth marking target, working at the stoppages inside 50, snapping bananas, like that kind of thing, I feel like is where Stringer will be best served. When it comes to coaching, so Brad Scott, he's taken less than impressive teams to finals more than once with North Melbourne. Took them to a prelim. North Melbourne, right? So we know that Brad Scott has the ability to take a list and take a team that's not quite there and elevate them. And, not something that Scott gets a lot of credit for, really, but he did that. And I feel like he has another opportunity to do a similar thing here. And I think he just provides a bit of stability. He's a guy who had some experience working for the AFL. He's been a coach for a long time. I feel like he's going to provide a bit of stability and just kind of calm everyone down in that Essendon team, which just kind of been all over the place. It's been messy. It's been yuck. I feel like he might be the start of a new era for Essendon and take them somewhere really impressive. So when we look at sort of what will they look like if they go from bottom 4 to top 4? What will they look like? So the Bombers' defensive makeup is one of speed, not strength, right? It's their halfbacks and their back pockets more so than their fullback and centre halfback, where the strength really is, right? Or where they really shine. So to me, this is Essendon's game plan. This is their blueprint. Use their speedy small midfielders to drain the opposition of opportunity and force the opposition to make mistakes going inside 50, allowing them to sort of rebound off intercept and turnover. So get the ball a lot. Let Parrish and Shield and Merritt get 35 plus disposals, but do something with it effectively, right? But most importantly, just keep the ball to yourself, basically, and don't allow the other team to get their hands on it. And even if they do get their hands on it, because of the speed of that midfield, force them to make mistakes by providing pressure. I think that's the main thing that Essendon was missing last season. They were great when they had the ball, but man, they gave up so many scores when they didn't. So I feel like they just need to make a slight adjustment here and go, hey, that speed you've got, use it defensively. We love it when you burst through the center square and you go inside 50 with blasting speed. That's great. Do that. But use that speed sparingly so that you have enough in your engine, have enough fuel left to chase a guy when you turn the ball over, which will happen. It's football, right? When you have to chase down a guy, when you have to put in a smother, when you have to kind of push him off balance a bit to, again, just force them to make mistakes going inside 50. Because you might not have the sort of lockdown defenders needed to win one-on-ones, but if you can force the entries inside 50 to be errors or be inaccurate, you don't need lockdown one-on-one defenders because the ball's not going to be placed where it has to be, and you can get those small, fast, speedy guys off half back to pick it up and rebound. And when you're going inside 50, because of that three-pronged tall forward line, you'll be able to let Jake Stringer do what he's best at. Because Peter Wright, Wiedemann, and Jones will get all the defensive attention, right? In terms of like one-on-one defensive attention. Jake Stringer, I don't know if he's going to get the fourth best defender necessarily because he's not a tall, so he won't get the same kind of attention. But I feel like it will really free him up. And that's what they need to do. If Jake Stringer kicks 2 goals a game, I don't know what his record is, but I reckon it's pretty impressive at Essendon. So just let him do that. And then when we look at their fixture, so ranked 16th, so the third easiest schedule, they really could start their campaign undefeated. I know that's crazy, but you look at their first month. They face Hawthorn, Gold Coast, St Kilda, and GWS. In my opinion, Gold Coast is probably the toughest team there. We might get into it later down the track, but I really don't trust that St Kilda's going to make the jump. And then Hawthorn and GWS, like they're bottom half teams, they really could be undefeated. They could go 4-0, which I know doesn't mean finals, right? But man, 4-0, that's a nice place to start. You can afford some losses down the track when you start 4-0, and just confidence-wise. Whether they do that, that's another question, but there's an opportunity there. They're not playing Melbourne, Geelong, Bulldogs, Brisbane in their first month. They're playing Hawthorn, Gold Coast, St Kilda, and the Giants. They could win all those games. Even if they lose to Gold Coast or St Kilda and they're 3-1. I feel like you'd be pretty happy as an Essendon fan. And they only play 2 top 8 teams twice. Should be said, though, those teams are both top 4 teams. They play Geelong and Collingwood twice. They end their year with back-to-back away games before facing Collingwood at home. So that's going to be a tough end of the month. So they've got a really favourable first month. The last month's tough. You got 2 back-to-back away games, and you face Collingwood at home. And Collingwood, you feel like you're going to be at the pointy end. Might be fighting for a top 4 spot at that point. So Essendon, to me, of these 4, probably have the weakest list, in my opinion. But they probably have my favorite forward line. It's tough because I really like Jack Darling, Oscar Allen, and Liam Ryan for West Coast. But Essendon's could be something because we know Peter Wright can put up great numbers. Harrison Jones, Sam Wiedemann, again, if he's your third tall, right, he could be really impressive. I feel like he was being demanded of so much at Melbourne to be the guy, whereas he's going to be the third tall. So he might get a lot of opportunities to show himself. And then Jake Stringer. So their forward line's really filled with talent. Oh, and didn't even think to mention Anthony McDonald, Tip and Woody. Like, I don't know when he'll start because he retired and then came back. I don't know whether or not he's on track to play for round one. I'd have to look into it a little more, but I think he's going to play this season. So even if ideally he'd wanted to play in round one, but even if he's not there until month 2, add that, and they definitely have the best forward line out of these 4. If you had Peter Wright, Harrison Jones, Sam Wiedemann, Jake Stringer, and Tip and Woody, man, that's the kind of forward line that Essendon sort of need for a defense that's probably a bit lacking, a back line that's lacking of some strength. That's how they would, again, talking about being their best lawyer and putting forward their best case to go top 4. That's what it would look like. It would look like a team that gives up a lot of points, but they win a lot of close ones, and they put up a lot of points as well. They're a high-scoring, fun team. Like Collingwood, although Collingwood's more defensively sound, they win a lot of close games because they're able to score quickly because of the sort of offensive firepower. They've got the midfield there. They've got the ruckman. The list isn't as deep as the rest of the other 3, but if there's anything Essendon has over these other 3 teams, it's that. It's their firepower. Could be really impressive. So just to wrap this episode up before we end it here, as you can probably tell, West Coast to me are the one. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Who you feel like has the best chance to go from bottom 4 to top 4. To me, it's West Coast. If I had to go in order, it'd be West Coast, GWS, and then this one's tough. Probably North Melbourne, Essendon. I feel like North Melbourne have some kind of expectations a bit loftier than Essendon. Essendon feel like they're in true rebuild mode because they need some key defenders. They need some different midfielders in that mix. They probably need another forward now that just Stringer's got so many injury issues. Like, they feel like they're in rebuild mode, whereas North Melbourne, they're still in their rebuild, but they've got a lot of the pieces there. And like I said, if Sheasel and Wardlaw can actually have an impact in this team, they might be set up. So I probably would go West Coast most likely, then GWS, then North and Essendon. But man, I'm almost tempted to not put money on it, but like put my reputation on it for West Coast to make the finals because I really feel like they're going to make it. And I know this is about bottom 4 to top 4, not necessarily finals, more specifically top 4. And I feel like the case I've laid out, West Coast could make it to the top 4. But I'm actually pretty confident they make finals. I think they make finals. They've got the list. They've got the coach. They've got the game plan. They've got the home field advantage. They've got the second easiest schedule. If there's any team that's going to go from bottom 4 to top 4 the same way Collingwood did, it's West Coast. And there's some interesting parallels. The coaching isn't because, Collingwood had a new coach coming into last season and Adam Simpson is still there. But just list-wise and sort of contextually, Collingwood were always there in the kind of pointy end of the season and then had this drop-off for a couple of years. And then they got back to where they were, and you look at their list and you're like, they basically have the same guys. Why did they drop off? Like a lot of the players that were in last season's Collingwood team played in the grand final in 2018 for Collingwood, right? And I feel like that's the similarity here with West Coast is that they've been up there at the pointy end of the season year after year after year, and they had 2 bad years, particularly last year where they had 2 wins. Would not shock me in the least if West Coast comes out and gets 3rd or 4th place and everyone's like, whoa, they've come out of nowhere. They went from 17th to 4th or whatever. And you look at their list and you're like, they basically have the same guys. The list has not changed. And so that's why I feel like West Coast has the best chance. GWS, similar things. I think they have less depth, but they've got a similar spread of talent. Love their defense. And with a new coach, similar to Collingwood, maybe that's all they need. Just Adam Kingsley to come in there, change it up a bit, revitalize and reinvigorate these players that have kind of lost a bit of magic. North, who knows with Alistair Clarkson, he's done it before with Hawthorn when they rebuilt and took them to a premiership way earlier than they thought. Maybe North Melbourne, this is what they need. Just a new guy to come in, a guy who's got it, who will set a new standard. And I like their depth. They've got a lot of depth. They've got a lot of versatility as a team, and the easiest schedule. So I feel that really works in their favor. And as I said about Essendon, they lack a bit of depth, but man, their forward line, if Tip and Woody plays, will be a tough matchup for the best of defenses. And if Merritt, Parrish, and Shield can just not just play more defensively, but just add some more strings to their bow. If they can just be a little more versatile as a midfielder, then again, that midfield kind of goes up there with the best. Like Merritt, Parrish, and Shield, I feel like they're all top 10 picks. They've just got to live up to that potential that they know they can reach. They've just got to get there. So that's it for today's episode. A bit of a shorter one compared to last week's. But there's a lot of fun researching these teams. They're teams that I haven't really paid a lot of attention to. But it was great to kind of look into their lists and just think through. Because like I said, it's happened before. It happened last year. We know that one of these teams will make finals, right? Just by history. You feel like one of these teams makes finals. Does one of them make top 4? It's interesting to discuss what they would have to look like. And everything I've listed, all these like advantages that they could play, that's what they're saying internally. I'm sure of it. I'm sure internally they're saying the same thing or close to the same thing. They're saying, guys, we got it. It's all here. We've got the game plan. We've got the list. Do you believe in me? Let's go. And, we've seen time and time again, doesn't work out. But I've got a feeling one of these teams is going to go all the way and not just make finals, but go top 4. And if it's not West Coast, could be GWS, could be North, could be Essendon, who knows? But it'll be fascinating to see. Markers Up will be back in your feed next week. I've got a bunch of ideas of what I want to do for next week's episode. Intra-club matches are coming up soon, as are the preseason matches. I think over the next couple of weeks they'll be playing. I'm not sure exactly when each team is scheduled to. I'm looking forward to covering them if I can get them on KO or just kind of see all the different tactics that these teams are going to try out before they actually go ahead and play in round 1. But until then, thanks so much for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day.